been incredibly stressful.
Sorry.
And is going, that's okay, and is going to continue to likely be quite stressful for leaders, owing to COVID and staff shortages and Ofsted. So this session really is about providing some support to focus on personal well-being of leaders in the effort to support themselves and their teams. So hopefully you'll leave today thinking about your well-being, having learned a little bit about the science behind Energize Leadership, and with a bit of an understanding of how to enhance your leadership capacity. So to make sure we're helping you as best possible on the topic, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box. Feel free to drop the questions in on the topic or around the topic. If you want to share some of your struggles or experiences, we're really open to that. And Matt will leave a little bit of time to answer your questions at the end of the presentation. And we will be sending the recording round to you by the end of the week, so don't worry too much about making notes. And that's it. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, super. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Liz, for the introduction, and thank you to Liz and Christina for putting tonight's event together. As Liz said, we were going to originally run this as a one-day conference, but obviously due to COVID and the stretch on school leaders, we wanted to make sure that everyone could still access this, and so we're going to run tonight and then a digital series as well. So we're going to run 5 programs over that, and so with each program we'll have a different speaker on, actually, so it's not just me. So the first person will be coming on will be from Complete, and Complete are a business coaching group who really have taught me a great deal about energy and leadership, but they have also got a fantastic app that they're using around emotional regulation, so that will be part of week 1. We also have the Paralympian Rachel Morris coming on to talk about eating and exercise. We're going to do some work around essence with a senior. Sorry, I think somebody's mic's on there. And then we're going to be looking at how our environment can shape that as well. So just a little bit of background. My doctorate is built around intrinsic motivation. So this evening we're very much talking around you, and we want to try and create some space for you to have some thinking time for yourself. Whenever we sort of run leadership days and we work with our own teams on this, it really comes through very apparently when we start the teams that very little time is taken for yourself. So I hope that this evening your half an hour for yourself is an opportunity to sit back and reflect, pick up on some of the things. Not everything will land, not everything will sit with who you are and where you are on your journey, but essentially this is we want that to be a really safe space for you to come and join. And as Liz said, we'll have questions at the end, but if there's slightly more personal questions, you can drop me a line, and we can follow up and have some follow-on conversations from that as well. So it's just really how do we support leaders through to the end of term after what has been an incredibly difficult 3 years in education and globally, of course, as well. Okay, so just to introduce Pathways. Pathways is really around coaching, consultancy, and catalysts. So we coach and consult and speak through various platforms and with various groups throughout education. We started Pathways a year and a half ago, mainly because of this 5% statistic. So 5% of adults with learning disabilities do not find employment, and let alone purpose. So after we built our curriculum and implemented it within our school, we actually wanted to take that further. So we're looking at now creating social enterprise coffee shops that are actually colleges, and then the seed funding from the coffee shop goes into the young person social enterprise seed funding. And we run a sort of incubator social enterprise curriculum that is digital. And we have 2 colleges, and we also have our school, which is re-engaging young people into that. And so whilst we're also working from grassroots, we also want to work system-wide with leaders and build that up as we go through. So our mission is around creating equitable communities, and therefore to achieve our mission, we seek to merge education, business, and quality of living. by increasing the capacity of individuals and therefore the collective, and hopefully that will come through this evening. Okay, so we really look at this and think that, you know, individuals are actually building the system. So whilst lots of people are waiting for lots of things to change in education, we actually think that if you begin with individuals and developing their own capacity, then the capacity for the system to change is possible too. And this is exactly what tonight is about, and exactly what Pathways is about creating this space to evolve our human family and that capacity towards sustainable goals by vertically developing leaders and teams so that we can innovate within a collective consciousness and expand our capacity as a whole. So it's lovely to sort of have our community on board this evening. I know there's lots of familiar faces on the call as well, but you're very welcome to reach out to Pathways, either around the school, the college, the way that we're running those two parts of the grassroots, or around Pathways and development and our coaching, consultancy and catalyst aspects of that as well. Okay, so as I said, not very many people create much space, and I tried to sort of do this in a way in which it summarized how much time we truly give to ourselves, and particularly if you are in a role in leadership, the demand from others that we support and serve is very, very high. But that's not just in leadership, that's in life in general. That's families, that's friends. Lots of externals are demanding lots of our time and attention. So how much truly are we going to actually create space? And with that space, create awareness. And that's where we're really going to go this evening, is how can I look to create some of this space and therefore increase my awareness? There's some other steps beyond that, but that's where we're going to tonight. And the essential goal is, how can we create this much space? Wouldn't that be ideal? To really explore ourselves, to really sort of mature and develop who we are and understanding who we are. Because the more secure we are, the more able we are to serve others. So, as I said, Complete have really shared this model with me, and I still coach with Complete as well. But this understanding of vertical development that has come from Robert Keegan's work, Ken Wilber's work, is around adult maturity and adult development. So we talk a lot in education around child development and how that matures, but actually we take this the next step further into adult maturity as well. And how do we see that transformational growth and dynamic use of lenses with different maturity, and essentially increasing our center of gravity, that maturity. Whereas the horizontal side is very much around learning new skills, building information and knowledge, and transferring across domains. And I think that in education, we've spent a long time on horizontal, and I don't find many leadership programs out there that really focus on the vertical. And if we look at actually incorporating both of these things into not just leadership development, but into child development, what we're going to move towards is much more expansive development. So if we think about a small balloon, how does a balloon expand and therefore have a greater capacity? And that's what we're going to be talking about with energy tonight. So how can you expand your capacity? But of course, this is all context dependent. And so, you know, just because we develop and evolve through certain stages of maturity, it doesn't mean that in the different contexts we don't take steps backwards. So if we're being chased by a bear, for example, we may regress a few steps in order to survive that. And of course, we've all faced somewhat of a modern day bear with the pandemic, and really had to figure out who we are and where we are. So in that sort of notion of the bear, and thinking about our psychological and physiological maturity, our bodies haven't overly changed for around about 60,000 years. So the key part that has started to really evolve in that sense is our conscious. You know, that use of the prefrontal lobe, that creativity that makes us and distinguishes humans from every other species on the planet. But essentially, how we've come to really become consciously aware of ourselves, and really tapping into some of the subconscious is part of that. So we start off in life, you know, as babies, all of us begin at exactly the same stage, and we're impulsive. So Robert Keegan's work on on conscious development really maps this out, and looking at that impulsive nature, and therefore what's our energy and what's our energy need is all around impulsive. So, you know, food, survival, that basic aspect in being impulsive to survive. And then we start to take an interest in others, and we realize that some of our resources and needs are actually external to us, and we require others to be around us, whether that's parents or peers. This journey begins of us becoming more conscious of those who are around us. And then we step into this socialized mind. And this is pretty much where about 60% of the population resides, is in the socialized mind. So we are massively affected by those around us in that sense. That maturity is built up around those around us. And that's a really key point. And there is a next step coming on this slide, but I'm not going to bring that to you just yet. I just want to highlight how key this socialized mind is and how unaware you might be of the impact that it's having on you. So just looking at that external data flow, you know, from around the world, we will see that globalization happening. We've seen with digital technology, the mobilization of human beings being able to travel from one side of the earth to the other. And essentially, this is just picking up our nervous system, and our nervous system is feeding into our minds. So everything that is going on outside of the body is being picked up by the nervous system and brought in. I don't think I'm teaching you anything particularly new there. However, with that, we have to be really considerate of how our body is so keen on keeping balance, and that's why those scales are at the bottom. We have such finite levels of balance, and the detail and effort that our bodies go into to keep that balance is a really key energy expenditure. So anytime that we need to adapt to our external environment, we're using energy. So that's essentially homeostasis. So whether that's pH levels, sugar levels, biochemical aspects, so our feelings and the impact that has on our hormones, and all of this constantly is being tweaked, adjusted. And of course, our brain is doing some of that processing, but we also have neural cells in the heart and in our stomach as well. And so the nervous system running through our whole body is doing a lot more processing than we may realize. And too much data is going to have an impact on our brains as well. And so with the work of polyvagal theory, essentially, the heart reaches a point of chaos and our prefrontal lobe shuts down. Our smart thinking is shut down, and therefore we become far less productive, as many of us in Leaders in Education coming up to half term probably really empathize with. You know, how productive are we right now? Are we actually using our smart thinking in that sense? So these external conditions are just populating us everywhere. There is stress being delivered to us, and it's not just in the news and what's actually happening across the world, but obviously everything is at our fingertips with mobile phones, and this complete sort of addictive sort of on button is keeping our sympathetic nervous system on high alert. Something is going wrong at every second. And why do the media push this? Because essentially it's keeping us interested, it's capturing our attention. Exactly the same with fast food, big tech, big pharma, all of these big corporations that are essentially running the world these days are grabbing our attention using fear, because we're always going to be on higher alert for fear than we are going to be able to consciously step back. So, you know, during the pandemic in particular, there were 4 big drivers of this fear-based, and that's not putting that on media, although that's definitely a factor of how they are gaining clicks, but essentially the impact of lockdown and what that actually did to us. So there was this helplessness. What could we actually do? What could we control? Not much. We didn't feel we could really do much other than step outside our front doors and bang pots and pans for the NHS. Or if you were a frontline worker, you were probably still in school, but you know, you couldn't reach everyone, or probably not to the extent that you wish to anyhow. And with that came disconnection, and as a result, we certainly saw fear overload. You know, without our tribe around us. Again, coming back to that socialized mind, how we're seeing and relying on others to assure us and to be there for us. and disengagement, and the great resignation as a result that has come from that. And as a result, we saw then at a physiological level this languishing. How did we, actually, I'm not quite sure I can really do anything, and so I'm just going to sort of just survive, really, disconnect, and see this sense of isolation, and that really built up our stress, anxiety, and for some depression. And we're still seeing the effects of that now, in my opinion, within education. Staffing crisis is still an all-time high, hence why we're digital this evening rather than face-to-face. Leaders cannot get out, but also this unproductive nature of that. So with disengagement, we really became quite unproductive. And a big question for all of you is how productive, how unisolated have you got out of that sort of post-COVID lull yet, with languishing, but also what's the stress and anxiety that remains on you now, and really checking in with yourself again, why we've created space this evening. Have these things been ridden from your life, or are they still quite apparent? And as a result, we saw some really big statistics on the level of impact this is having across our teams. So 70%, 74% of the workforce disengaged. That's an incredibly scary number, leading to 21% less productivity. Anxiety up by 20% of the population. Personally, I think that number is too small. And then languishing, and leading to that 25% turnover. So the great resignation that's happening, the huge inaccess to teachers, LSAs, and leaders in education. A lot of the studies are showing that deputy heads are not willing, keen to step up and actually lead schools. And so we're going to be faced with a pretty huge staffing crisis if we don't do something about our space. So it comes back to that space. What are we going to do to actually overcome these things? And all of the answers to this, all of at least the science that sits behind it, is under a really common word that you'll see there is self. Intrinsic motivation is not self, but if you were to step back and look at self-determination, that is intrinsic motivation. So what is the self going to do? So we can't keep relying on this external demand that's coming upon us. We can't wait for conditions to be right. We have to take responsibility for the self and who we are, because that is the evolved part of our human being, our being, not being human, but our sense of being. Are we present in this moment, in this space? It's a question to think about. So, as we come through then, we then step into this self-authoring mind. So you pick up the thread again of self and space for the self in that sense. And in this space, what we decide is actually we don't need to belong to one tribe or another. We don't need to rely on social media or society to influence how it is that we see the world. What we begin to do is self-author. And that means we can redesign some of the boundaries and ceilings that have sat upon us for most of our adult life. And as we said, 65% of adults are in the socialized mind. So if we're thinking about the number of people who are actually able to be self-authoring, it's about 30%. And the question to ask yourself is, how self-authoring are you of your own journey up until this point? How self-authoring are you that you can create some space for the self and not feel guilty about it, because society would expect you to be working 8 till 8 every day, non-stop, back to back, no lunch break, no personal break for that physiological system to reset, for that smart thinking to kick back in. So if we can become self-authoring and create that space for ourselves, plus understand the science of the body and the way that works, and the way that we can increase our performance, then we can really benefit across all of those areas, that motivation, that self-worth, that self-regulation, and our self-agency. And in education, we are crying out for change. And yet there's a massive lack of self-agency because we don't have either the motivation or energy left in the tank, quite frankly, even if we did have the motivation, or the self-worth to really think, actually, I do know what I'm talking about. I'm willing to make adaptations beyond the system, or the self-regulation to maintain it when we do go on that journey, because we divert back to course because Ofsted are coming in. So all of these things sort of build towards that self-agency. So how are you going to create that? And when you can build up this sense of self, you can really get things going. Productivity with intrinsic motivation enhances your team and yourself by 10 times the amount of what you can produce. And that's really well researched data in that sense. Okay, so the misconception is often around time management. I don't have enough time, I can't do this. But actually, if I ask you the question of how much can you get done in 5 hours with no energy compared to how much can you get done in 1 hour when you do have energy? And if you just want to drop something on the chat there, it'd be really interesting to see about, how much time are you actually giving to yourself to recharge? And so much is written around time management, but actually it's around the energy management that is truly key to this. So again, we often go in search of external energy. Where can we go and pick up our hit from? We've had a hard day. Let's go and get some dopamine from the local takeaway or that chocolate bar. Or I've had a tough day, I need to call a friend or call a family member. Again, nothing wrong with that, but just being aware of where are we actually seeking our energy source from. And there's a real difference between resource, which is external, and resurgence, which is internal. And again, it's energy from outside or energy from inside. So resource versus resurgence. And what we're really focusing on this evening and across the energy series is resurgence. So this surge of energy, resurge from within, and how can we essentially not have to rely on waiting for the perfect condition outside of us to really actually see the energy within us and foster that and develop that. But of course, these are old style batteries, and if we want to be really effective in managing this energy, we need to become sustainable, as does the planet. So if we're going to do this, we're going to say, actually, we're not just doing sort of a one-off spa break to recoup and rest and recharge the batteries at half term. How are we going to embed this energy practice into day-to-day work that we're doing? How is that in our classrooms for our young people who are also feeling the same effects of COVID? How is this built into our team meetings? How are we checking in on the state of our team and making sure that everyone has the energy to get through the day? And we can actually use that pretty effectively to really recharge very, very quickly. We always think, I think as teachers, I always personally used to really dive in towards the end of term and try and get everything done, and then crash for the first week of the holidays or the first weekend at a half term. And instead actually pacing yourself and realizing that you can't constantly be pressing the accelerator. There's got to be times, and you're then slamming on the brakes, there's got to be times in which you can tap on the accelerator and loosen the accelerator and tap on the brake. But I only passed my driving test a couple of months ago, you see, so my driving metaphors are pretty off in that one. So then we begin to have a look at this internal data flow. And what we realize is that there's a huge amount of data flowing through our bodies. And this is, constantly churning up. And that's what we call our physiological data. This is the big data, but unrefined. This is the data coming through from our muscles. Our sensory system then delivers all of that information back up through from our organs all the way through up to our neural pathways, whether that's in the stomach, the heart, or the mind. But there's a huge amount of internal data going on, but are we conscious of it? Are we even aware of it? And when we begin to filter that, we then have this different effect, which is very much more around our emotions in that sense as well. And so we refine, sorry, the slide has skipped as a result there. So we refine some of this big physiological data into our emotional data. Sorry, 1 second. And this will be where we start to have emotions. Now, we're not actually conscious of emotions. Difference between emotions and feelings are we become conscious of feelings, whereas with emotions, we don't actually register that consciously. So again, coming back to the self-awareness, the self-consciousness. So with feelings, we begin to realize, oh, this is my state. This is my emotional state that I'm currently feeling. There's that difference between emotions and feeling in that sense. And again, the quadrant of emotions, universe of emotions with complete really roadmaps all of these emotions for you. But essentially, when we're in a high energy state, we're either functioning with cortisol, which is that stress and anxiety hormone, or DHEA, which is the sort of antidote to all things cortisol. And that means that we're functioning at a much higher level, but we will go further into that in the emotion session in the series. But where are you at now in your own state? When was the last time you stopped for a minute, 2 minutes, and checked in on your own emotional state? Big question again. So that key part of this is when you are there, whether this is you now at the end of term or after 3 years of COVID in that sense, is are you at a point of recovery, discovery, progress, or actually thriving? And what we tend to find and what the research suggests is when you start to really acknowledge, notice the progress that you have made, that is when you can really break out of disengagement, really break out of languishing. And certainly when you're discovering and going back out into the world and discovering connection again, that's where you're moving out of your isolation. So again, just thinking about where you are on that journey, what do you actually need? Do you need to recover? Or do you need to do some work on self-discovery and have that space for that? Are you picking up and appreciating the progress? Because when you're in a state of appreciation, you can only be in a positive emotional state. You can't be angry and appreciative at the same time. And that feeds in again to that sense of self in that space within the moment. So where our thoughts tend to take us back to the past or into the future, instead we talk very much around the present. So are we appreciating our recovery, our discovery, our progress, and our thriving in the present? Not what's to come, not what has been, but essentially now in the moment. And just really understanding that it's often the ego, that external self, actually in its own right, is having that chat with you in the back of your head. So how do you become more conscious, more aware of where you are right now? And then, of course, we look at how can you do this with your team, because a whole sustainable organization requires a whole team that has sustainable energy as well. So how do you have a real understanding, and how do your team have that understanding? How do you have that common language and common frameworks for energy management, and how you can begin to do that? So this is the leadership model that I've developed with Pathways, and it starts very much always at the center. Until you develop yourself, you cannot influence the collective, and that includes the external conditions that you're battling with from the slide earlier, and the same goes for the global influence in that sense. So how do you begin with yourself, create that space for yourself, which is why everything has been circular this evening, building to this model, and then looking at the collective and global, and again, the presence, not present, the presence. Right now is the gift. There is no real tomorrow. There is no real yesterday. Today is the only reality. So where is that presence for you? And can you see both the external and internal influences of that, and also the explicit and tacit? And that's with this point around explicit and tacit is really, really where we talk about this collective wisdom. What can we see in the tacit, the subtleties with our team, with ourselves, that we're picking up on that others are not? And again, that comes down to awareness. That comes down to that space that you're giving yourself to actually listen before answering. All of those moments in wisdom that build towards that. So how do we create a more nuanced version of ourselves, a wiser, version of ourselves. And again, when we think about space and wisdom, we always think about those sort of archetypal wise characters that are slow in their speaking, that are considerate of what they're saying. You know, not everyone is in a rush. And as a result, we become far more effective rather than far more efficient. And I think there's a real difference in how we're moving out of the 20th century efficiency into 21st century effectiveness, because otherwise we can never stop. There's always going to be something else to do. So how do we become effective in what we do rather than efficient in what we do? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to a minute just to have some space for yourself and just reflect on some of the things. Like I said, some things will land, some things won't. We've tried to keep it quite short this evening. But where are you? Are you in need of recovery, in need of discovery or progress? And what do you need to get there to truly thrive? I'm just going to give you 30 seconds of reflection on that. So the series itself is going to have 5 components to it. I think I mentioned them before. Our environment, what can we actually create in our environment, in our teams, that allows for this space? Really simple concept of 5 or 10 minutes of reflection, but also what are the other components that shape our environment? So we'd be looking at things like psychological safety, the climate and culture of the organization and of your team, and the security that is required for that. Emotion, as I said, we'll be completely speaking around the app and how that works both with a greater awareness, literacy and management of emotions, but also around the physiology behind your heart rate variability in your prefrontal lobe, your essence, so your true purpose. How can you begin to establish where it is that you're going to spend your energy? So back to that sustainability point, and often you talk about the North Star. We would be talking in that sense of the sun being a star. So where is it that we're going to spend our energy? And are we doing that effectively? Are we actually aware of what it is that we want to be doing in life? And again, that's self-awareness in that sense. And then the eating and exercise. We don't do it as frequently as emotions, because emotions are constant, but these things are influencing us again externally, but are influencing our internal state. So how can we influence that eating and exercise? And as we said, we'll have Rachel Morris, who absolute, from a motivational point of view, also inspiring to speak to. And then how do we encompass this? And we'll be talking a lot around mastery, the mastery goals rather than performance goals. How do we move on to the next step? How do we face some of the challenges that we're looking at? And we won't just be delivering. What we want to be doing is having a sort of 20-minute check-in, a half an hour delivery, and then half an hour to take that away in your groups again and really think about how you're going to apply it. Back to the point around vertical development over horizontal, is how you're actually going to apply this learning rather than just learn it. So we sort of apply 5%, but really it's about that 95% of how you're going to take it away and really apply it into your practice, into your teams, and most importantly, into yourself. So yeah, we then sort of look at that, personalizing your journey, using your feedback and assessments to design that journey, and readying you for the journey and guiding you and your team on it as well. So we look to increase that personal performance, people leadership, transforming performance, and system leadership in that sense as well. So it does start with you. It will start with your personal performance, but it certainly leads on to how do we begin to really shape the education system into the 21st century. And just outside of that, everything that comes through to pathways development, we really sort of promote our social corporate responsibility. So we do give our time back to pro bono development work. So if you feel like you can't afford the course, we actually have some funding. So sort of, we'll do a very gentle means testing with you, but you can apply for that grant funding. And you then become that part of that network of forward-thinking leaders. Not many leaders, trust me, work with couple of hundred over lockdown, and lots of leaders do not yet have that self-awareness. And I think it's required if we're truly going to move the education system on. And of course, you're welcome to our network events. So we have a number of coffee shops and festivals, and try to do some really different things for leaders in education, because we also believe that, and having been one, that we're pretty unappreciated for the courage and capacity of what it is that we do, and that we've certainly done over the last 3 years. And again, you know, that network is what is our collective capacity, and we believe we can do more as a collective than we can do individually. So yeah, back to the last slide really. So do get in touch if you want to. I'm sure you know where the Pathways website is by now if you've already got onto tonight's course, but thank you very much for coming, and I hope that at least if you've done nothing else other than tune out from me and have half an hour, that you've taken that time for yourself. Okay, so we will take any questions. So I don't know whether people want to unmute. I will unpin myself. I really welcome, like we said, we're a real community in that sense, and you know, I really welcome people to turn their cameras on. I can stop recording so that we know it's confidential.